Good day, economic students. This is video one, series of videos on the production possibilities model, the basic building block and foundation of economic thinking. What is economics? Economics can be boiled down to this inequality presented on this slide. Economic resources, land, capital, and labor, are scarce relative to human wants, the things that people need and desire. Timber, oil, copper, minerals, land resources, machines, equipment, tools, factories, capital resources, and the intellectual and physical ability of human beings, labor, are scarce relative to the needs and desires of people traversing the planet. This inequality gives rise to the study of economics. The production possibility frontier, the production possibility curve, the production possibility model will help us quantify this burden of scarcity and display for a period of time a nation's potential productive ability. The burden of scarcity is real, limited resources. Because scarcity is unavoidable, human beings are forced to make choices. We discussed this idea in broad terms in part one of our economics class. Now we will quantify costs. One of the principal ideas of the production possibility models is to see graphically and calculate numerically, because of the burden of society and our necessity to make choices, what are the costs of the choices human beings make. Based on the principle of limited economic resources and unlimited economic wants, what is a nation's potential economic production for a given time period? The production possibilities curve demonstrates this vitally important economic principle graphically, and the table associated with constructing this curve represents this limitations of production, trade-offs, choices, and costs numerically. Economists identify four important lessons associated with the production possibilities model. The first lesson, limitations of production. Given the burden of scarcity, the fact that economic resources are limited relative to human wants, the model will demonstrate quantitatively and graphically a nation's absolute limitation to economic production for a specific period of time. Because lesson number one is etched in stone, it gives rise to our second lesson. Human beings are forced to make choices. Whenever there is a choice made, there will be some trade-off or cost involved. Again, the graph and the table will help us quantify economic choices made by society. A third and vitally important economic lesson associated with the production possibilities model, three types of economic efficiency. On a future slide, we will talk about full employment, productive efficiency, and allocative efficiency. Finally, the model considers changes to production possibilities in the future, and therefore the possibility of our fourth lesson, economic growth. Three types of economic efficiency introduced and explained by the production possibilities model. The model production possibility curve frontier represents society's maximum level of production for a specific or given period of time. In order for a society to achieve its maximum level of economic output, to produce anywhere along its production possibilities curve, it must put to use all of its available resources. The first type of efficiency, full employment. Land, capital, labor, skills of the entrepreneur for the specific time under consideration, represented by the production possibility curve. Full employment assumes all available resources are put to use in some productive capacity. Second type of efficiency, productive efficiency. Consider any product. Evaluate the product for the resources necessary to make that type of production take place. Use a simple example, something like a pencil. In a pencil, there are land resources, there are capital resources, and there are some human resources of labor and the entrepreneur. Assume that the pencil can be produced using 30 cents worth of economic resources. 30 cents combination of land, capital, labor, and the entrepreneur. Productive efficiency refers to the idea of producing goods and services using the least cost method of production. If the pencil can be produced using 30 cents worth of resources, do not use 35 cents worth of resources. Consider a more complicated product, something like a 75-inch LED television. It may take $500 worth of land, capital, labor, and skills of the entrepreneur to produce the 75-inch TV. An economist refers to the idea of production efficiency by stating, if the LED 75-inch TV can be produced using $500 worth of resources, don't allocate $510 worth of resources towards that production. Productive efficiency, producing using the least cost method of production, using the least amount of resources necessary to produce a product. It's important to note it does not mean products are of lesser quality. Economists believe it's necessary to allocate the proper number of resources, proper amount of resources to produce high quality products. However, don't over allocate resources towards the production of a good if it can be produced with fewer resources, produced using the least cost method of production. Allocative efficiency is a little more specific. The first two are straightforward. Full employment using all of your available resources. Productive efficiency, producing a product or a service using the least cost method of production. Allocative efficiency refers to the mix of output which maximizes society's happiness. We will visualize the production possibility frontier. We will look at the curve and identify infinite number of points that represent a combination of various type of outputs. Only one point on the curve represents the mix of the combination of output which maximizes society's happiness. Society will ultimately determine which point on its production possibility frontier is allocatively efficient by weighing marginal benefits and marginal costs. We will discuss allocative efficiency in more detail on a later slide, as it is important to demonstrate allocative efficiency when evaluating the model. We've been discussing economic resources for quite some time now. Let's discuss the four economic resources in more detail and identify the four types of income associated with each resource. Broadly speaking, economists divide resources into two types of resources. Land and capital are referred to as property resources. Labor and the skills of the entrepreneur are referred to as human resources. Land, the gifts of nature. So copper, minerals, natural gas, water, any of the elements such as silicon which can be used for solar panels, all considered land resources. Any land resource used in the productive capacity of goods and services receives rent or rental income. It's one of those economic terms that seems unfamiliar to most individuals. It makes sense to say I own a building and I rent it out. However, to an economist, if you own a field of 40 acres and the field is loaded with, contains large deposits of natural gas, and that natural gas is extracted and sold, the income associated with that land resource is referred to as rent or rental income. Capital resources, any manufactured aid or tools used in the productive capacity. Capital resources can include simple machines or complicated multi-billion-dollar factories. Capital resources can include software used by accountants to calculate gross profit margins for businesses and determine the tax liability of a corporation. Or capital can include something such as a dump truck used by a landscaper. Any machine, any tool, any type of manufactured aid that's used in the productive capacity is a capital resource. Again, an interesting term here. An economist identifies interest income when capital resources are put to use, and these capital resources generate economic income. The income associated with the capital resource is interest income. The human resources. Labor is the easiest one to explain. A laborer is simply the physical or mental abilities of human beings used in some productive capacity, and labor receives wages. For an economist, fringe benefits such as health care or contributions to 401k are all part of the wage income received by labor. The entrepreneur is a unique human resource. Think of the entrepreneur as the woman or the man who decides how to deploy the other resources. We will discuss the entrepreneur in more detail on the next slide. For now, notice that unlike the other three resources, land resources put to use receive rental income, capital receives interest income, labor receives wages. However, the entrepreneur could receive profit if successful, but could also suffer loss. Jean-Baptiste Say, French economist, reading Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, came to the conclusion that Adam Smith didn't really explain how the land, capital, and labor resources were ultimately deployed to produce goods and services. In other words, who is the person who decides what products should be produced, or what innovations are necessary, or what changes to the productive capacity are in order to increase profitability for the firm. You can see in the term entrepreneur a French type sounding word, Jean-Baptiste Say. So economists generally identify these four qualities of the entrepreneur. Number one is that they take the initiative. They look around and they decide what needs to be done. Number two is that they make policy decisions. Now this can be starting up your own company, or it could be within a larger corporation. Number three is that chief or principal skill of the entrepreneur, and that is they are an innovator. They come up with new technologies, new products, new methodologies for creating and producing existing products, right? And then, as identified on the last slide, the entrepreneur is a risk bearer. They have skin in the game, so to speak. If their ideas are successful, they can be rewarded handsomely. If she or he, entrepreneur, takes a risk but is ultimately a failure, they could suffer losses. On the next slide, we will construct a production possibility frontier, aka the production possibilities curve. All production possibilities curves are built on four assumptions. We will be able to review and visualize these assumptions on the next slide. For now, let's just introduce the ideas. Anywhere along the curve, in other words, when we see the production possibility frontier, when we look at the curve, any point on the curve, we will assume that the economy is achieving both full employment and productive efficiency. In other words, if the nation, the country, is producing at its maximum level of output. Now, there are many possible outcomes, infinite in reality, but any outcome along the curve, society is using all of its land, capital, labor, and skills of the entrepreneur, all available resources, and achieving productive efficiency, producing goods and services using the least cost method of production. Now, in the beginning of this video, we talked about the idea of unlimited economic desires and wants, limited economic resources, and the idea of choices, trade-offs, and costs. And then we talked about the idea of the production possibility frontier representing limitations of production for a specific time. Why are our productive capacities limited over a specific time under consideration? Look at assumption number 2 and number 3. The production possibility frontier represents the best society can do today given its fixed resources. So the production possibility curve will represent potential production, understanding that both in quantity and in quality, resources are fixed. For the time being, we only have a certain amount of land, capital, labor, and skills of the entrepreneur, and the quality of those resources is also fixed. Likewise, society has a fixed technology. We will discuss improvements in technology and changes in productivity as sources of economic growth further in this video, but for right now, society is dealing with and using the best methodology available when it considers production of any type of good or service. The final assumption is that the production possibility model, the production possibility frontier, represents a trade-off between two products, an x-axis and a y-axis. Now, as we will see on the next slide, these products can be broadly defined. Let's review our four assumptions. All production possibility curves, all production possibility models, every production possibility frontier is built on the four assumptions of full employment and productive efficiency, fixed resources in quantity and quality, fixed technology, and two products. Let's discuss two products first. This production possibility frontier represents a nation's potential output for a specific amount of time. On the X or horizontal axis, we are graphing, calculating potential production of consumer goods. Consumer goods satisfy economic wants directly and immediately, things that households, individuals consume on a regular basis. On the vertical axis, we are calculating potential production of capital goods, manufactured aids and tools used in the productive capacity, machines, tools, factories, and such. Notice our black production possibility curve, where it represents the maximum level of output a nation can achieve for the time being. We could assume that this production possibility curve, this production possibility frontier, represents potential economic output for 1 year. This model represents a nation's limitations of economic production for a given year. If you know anything about math, you understand there are an infinite number of points along this curve. Anywhere along our dark, bold curve, we are using all of our available resources, full employment, and producing goods and services using the least cost method of production. For the time being, society has fixed resources. We cannot access, this country cannot access, this nation cannot acquire any more land, capital, labor, or the skills of the entrepreneur. And those resources will not improve in quality over the course of the next 12 months. Likewise, there is fixed technology for the time being. Whatever methodologies we use to produce goods and services is the best available. Perhaps that will change in the future. Before we end this first video lecture on the production possibility frontier, let's revisit allocative efficiency. Remember, full employment is simple. Anywhere along the curve, society is using all of its available resources, land, capital, and labor. Likewise, productive efficiency is pretty straightforward to explain. Produce a product or a service using the least cost method of production. Allocative efficiency refers to the mix of output which maximizes society's happiness. The combination of capital goods and consumer goods which maximizes utility. This is what economists refer to as a normative decision. In other words, societies will make choices based on their perception of utility, which is a bit subjective. Two countries with the same political system, the same access to resources, and the same, relatively same population may choose vastly different points on their curve as allocatively efficient. So let's compare point A versus point C. We can notice that point A, not with specific numbers, just the idea that society has decided to allocate more of its production towards capital goods and fewer consumer goods. At point C, the opposite is happening. Society has shifted its land, capital, and labor away from capital good production and more towards consumer good production. Now, there's no perfect answer. Again, society decides which point on its curve is allocatively efficient by weighing the marginal benefits of consuming the next unit of that good or service versus the marginal cost of how resources could have been deployed otherwise. This concludes video 1. See you in video 2, Production Possibility lecture lesson.